Moving on to chapter 10, we're going to start covering thoracic anatomy. We're going to start with the respiratory system with a structure called the pleura. And what the pleura is it's just a serous membrane that's going to line the thoracic cavity and the lungs themselves. And that's just a fancy way of saying it's a membrane that's going to secrete a water-like substance. Now, anytime you see these terms parietal and visceral, you should be thinking with visceral, it will be physically touching an organ, whereas with parietal, it will not directly touch the organ itself. That's exactly what we see with the pleura. The visceral pleura will physically touch and cover the lungs, whereas the parietal pleura will line the thoracic cavity and not physically touch the lungs. We also have something called the hilum. This is just the opening that blood vessels and something called the primary bronchus, which we'll discuss later, will be able to enter the lung and access the interior of the lung. Now, this is a really cool picture to showcase the difference between those two layers of the pleura. In red, we have the parietal pleura, and you can see that it is not touching the lung directly, but it's just surrounding the lung. Whereas the visceral pleura, and highlighted in blue, is directly touching the lung. And you'll get more into what these pleura are doing in physiology, but essentially they're just going to be secreting a watery substance between the two of them to reduce friction. Now we also see the hilum, which is the opening of the lung here. You can see there's lots of stuff traveling to the inside of the lung. Now we also have a few structures we need to find on the lungs themselves. We have the apex, which is going to be the top point. And then we have the base, which will be the flattened portion at the bottom. We also have something called the oblique fissure. The oblique fissure, which you can find on both lungs. All this is it's an elongated cleft, or it looks like a cut taken out that's traveling at an angle. And again, you can find that on both lungs. Whereas the next one, the horizontal fissure, you can only find on the right lung. We also have a structure called the cardiac notch, which you only find on the inner or medial surface of the left lung, and that's just where the heart is going to be physically sitting. The lung will just kind of surround the heart itself. And then we have the lobes. We have a superior and inferior lobe. Now, both lungs will have a superior and inferior lobe, but the right lung will have a middle lobe. So on this picture, we're looking at a left lung here. We have the apex, the point, the base, the flattened portion. We have the oblique fissure coming at an angle all the way through here. We have the cardiac notch, this indentation right here. And then we have our two lobes. We have superior lobe, which is everything that's just above the oblique fissure. And then the inferior lobe, which is just everything below the oblique fissure. Now, in a right lung, it's pretty similar, just one little small difference, or one or two. And we have the apex still the same. The base is still the same down here. We have the oblique fissure, which is coming at the angle here. But now we have a horizontal fissure. That's one of our differences here. And then the other difference comes to the lobes. We have a superior lobe, which is at the top above all the fissures. We have inferior lobe, which is all below the oblique fissure. And then we have the middle lobe, which is located between both fissures. Now we also need to talk about the trachea and what it further divides into. So we covered trachea in chapter 9. The carina is going to be a cartilaginous ridge at the end of the trachea right before it divides. And the trachea is going to divide into two other pipes, which are called the primary bronchi. The primary bronchi, which we see right here, there's our trachea. Okay, there's our carina, this ridge right here before it splits, and then it splits into primary bronchi on either side, left and right. Now, each primary bronchi will also split into secondary bronchi, so it will branch even further. And the secondary bronchi will even branch into tertiary, and it'll just keep going down until we get to a smaller level.